Hello and welcome to the newsroom with Sana. Today we're going to be taking a look at three important stories. The first is going to take a focus on the Pakistan-Afghanistan talks, which we have seen earlier not ending in any breakthrough. And this is, of course, a matter of concern for Pakistan. But it seems now that there is a possibility of hope with Pakistan agreeing to once again negotiate with the Afghan Taliban regime on the request of the mediators that have asked them to continue their stay. The delegation, of course, is still there in Istanbul, but there are no real reports coming in as to whether or not the talks have resumed or whether or not there is any guarantee of what was required from the Afghan Taliban regime in the past. And so it remains to be seen how now what the mediators can possibly do given the current situation. But it seems that there is a possibility, and Pakistan, of course, has taken that hope forward because it is essential for peace and stability in the region. But the demands that Pakistan has made earlier are very, very clear and still stand ground. Our next story is going to focus on the very important and much anticipated meeting between the US President and the Chinese Premier. It's important, of course, especially in terms of the trade and investment relationships, and there has been positive rhetoric coming in with regards to the meeting, with the two leaders saying that at least for a year there seems to be a warming up of relations on trade and investment, and the kind of reports that we've been hearing in previously coming in from China with regards to the rare earths and coming in from the US with regards to 100% tariffs on Chinese goods are off the table for at least a year. However, does that mean that there will be significant progress as to how this relationship will evolve and how the two countries are taking that forward is not clear at the moment. And lastly, we're going to take a look at a very marked shift in US policy with the US President ordering to start nuclear testing. And this is, of course, very, very integral because it hasn't happened in 30 years, and it signifies a shift away from the moratorium that the US, of course, is a part of. And so it is essential to understand why is it that the US has made this particular decision and how that's going to impact the situation in the international community. The President has cited the reasons for other countries doing the same, such as Russia and China, and saying that the US needs to be ahead and at par with different countries, and it has to be very, very clear that if other countries can do it, and so can the US. But what would that mean, particularly for the kind of requirements that exist and the way that we've seen the reports coming in from Kremlin denying that it has done any nuclear testing and saying that it's only tested missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads. So we're going to be taking a look at what does that mean and how will that affect the international community. We're going to start off with a first segment that focuses on the possibility of a resumption of dialogue between Pakistan and the Afghan Taliban regime. And for that, we have been joined online by Mr. Mehmet Öztürk, who's the former editor-in-chief Anadolu agency, and Major General retired Mr. Zahid Mehmood, who's a defense analyst. Thank you very much for joining us, gentlemen, and being part of the newsroom. I'll start with you, Mr. Mehmet, because I want your take on what can your country do at this point. We, of course, are very, very grateful for the kind of opportunities and the kind of requests that have been extended by the Turkey leadership and their support in the current scenario. The mediators, of course, are playing their part, but earlier 4 rounds of talks have not been able to reach a breakthrough. How do you think that this time it will be different, and what sort of opinion or matters can be put at hand by Turkey to make the situation different this time around, to make the Afghan Taliban regime finally give the written guarantees that they earlier refused to do so?
Thank you very much, first of all, having me, and my regards to your guest. Turkey is doing its utmost trying. We have seen also Turkey was active in ceasefire in Gaza, and this time Pakistan is very dear for Turkey, and since establishment of Pakistan, Turkey has very strong relations with Pakistan, and in this difficult time, Turkey tries to solve this problem. But as you can understand, this is a big problem, and it will not be solved in a night and day. So I think more rounds we have to see, but this time there seems to be a softening the approaches from the both sides. Returning Pakistani negotiating team to negotiation table indicates, and also there must be a softening position from the Afghani side because there was accusations and counter accusations from the both sides. What we learned from the media of the both countries, Afghanistan and Pakistan, Pakistan says that Afghanistan delegation refused to give written guarantees for the terrorist activities, cross-border terrorist activities, and Afghanistan was claiming that Pakistan did not give guarantee for using its airspace for drones of United States and violating Afghan airspace. Now, returning to negotiation table indicate that there is a softening in the positions, and not only Turkey. Believe me, all Muslim countries waiting for good news in these negotiations, and Turkish side requested Pakistani team, because you have also maybe observed in the Pakistani media that Pakistani team withdrew from the negotiations. Now there is a new chance for the peace, and I think both sides will not, must not miss this good chance for stopping the bleeding of both sides.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Mehmet Öztürk, for joining us and sharing your views. And of course, it's very, very essential to see how this goes forward. Zahid, I want your take now with reference to how you see the current situation, particularly when we take a look at Pakistan's side. And this is, of course, very, very integral to how the situation is evolving. The defense minister had made an earlier clear statement saying that anything coming in from Afghanistan will be taken as a violation of the ceasefire and will be taken as a measure that Pakistan will respond to. And now, of course, Pakistan is once again open to this dialogue because that is the preferred stance that Pakistan wants to take, regional peace and stability. But given the fact that we know that the recent talks have not been able to result in a breakthrough, how hopeful are you in terms of countries like Turkey or Qatar being able to negotiate with the Afghan Taliban regime once again? Of course, our delegation has been asked to stay and it is staying back. But really, what do you think will be the possibilities? Because we haven't had any real guarantees coming in from the Afghan Taliban regime side. Do you think that there's any change in their stance?
Thank you very much, Sana, for the invite, and my regards to Mr. Mehmet. And I've heard his views. As a Pakistani and from Pakistan nation side, I think we have a lot of respect for Turkey. Turkey is Pakistan's strategic partner. And in the recent past, we have seen that Turkey has become a partner for the stability, partner of stability also, you know. So in all domains. So we have a lot of respect for that. And thanks to Qatar as well for playing their important role. Sana, we were already having a kind of a conscious optimism even before the start of these talks. But I'm happy that at least these talks are continuing and maximum chance is being given to the peace through the talks, resolution of the issues through the talks. But anyway, I'll be keeping my fingers crossed. And to be very honest, I'm not very hopeful at this moment. The way the Taliban delegation has reacted to all the proposals, there's a larger understanding, larger sense of understanding, and larger, understanding of the conflict. And the unfortunate role being played by Afghanistan is very, very clear and evident. Of course, Pakistan is there to have a stable Afghanistan first. Why I say Afghanistan stability first? Because if Afghanistan is stable, Pakistan is automatically going to be a stable country. this most of the incidents happening on Pakistani side, these terrorist acts, these are being orchestrated from the soils of Afghanistan. In 2025, there has been around 585 incidents of terrorism in Pakistan, and the higher percentage has been conducted from the soils of, somehow or other, there has been an Afghan connection. There has been a troika also found in this, the troika between India as a proxy sponsor, Afghanistan, TTA, by providing a synergy and a kind of a cover to these terrorist organizations, and TTP as their lead, instrument. So in Pakistan also, after the terrorist acts, once these terrorists were taken out, large number of these terrorists belong to Afghanistan. There were terrorists from Pakistan as well. So it means that this is a great proof, there is a huge connection. Why this talk is not getting towards a better end or towards the right direction? Almost all the things were decided, and once the time to sign the draft has come, so after consulting people back home and consulting maybe their new friends, again there were scuttlers which were found, and these talks couldn't move forward. They're not ready to give the written guarantees. Even once the third time the draft was prepared, the Pakistani delegation head, Mr. Shah, has very clearly said that even in Islam and in religion, if this thing is signed or decided thrice, so it is considered as final, and they agreed to it. They were in. They concurred to this statement, and then maybe once they went out, already hawks are sitting, whose survival is in the friction. And we can talk later in the program that why these are not being, who all are the spoilers, why there's no success. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, we are conducting a dialogue with the non-state actors who are discussing or who are coming out with their proposals, maybe, or the approach they want to adopt is a total in the framework of non-state actor behavior, and this is not a structured state. They're not there to with the agenda for the people of Afghanistan. They're there with the agenda of their own and their proxy sponsor, which is not going to
Absolutely.
serve the purpose.
Right, and General Zahid, I'm glad you spoke about these spoiler elements because it is very, very important. And these links, of course, with India are important for Pakistan, and it's something that Pakistan has put forward with evidence on various platforms as well. But I want your take in terms of how is this situation, this nexus, these terror networks, helping the Afghan Taliban regime? What's the incentive for them to fight this proxy war for India?
The only incentive, and the huge incentive, is the economy attached with this friction, this war economy. A lot of payments, a lot of money. It's not easy to ask someone to put your people in the line of a lot of hazards, and even to the extent that their soldiers have been losing lives, who they motivate on and radicalize them on a kind of an ideology which is a Sharia ideology. So the main motivational force and main driver behind all this is the economic linkages. A lot of money is being paid, a lot of incentives are being given, and these Afghan Taliban, they are drawing two advantages. One, they're getting money, and secondly,
Yeah.
they are enhancing their control in Afghanistan as well. There is this even this delegation had shown the divisive trends and divisive discussions. So it means that there's no central control in Kabul, in Afghanistan. So wherever the commanders are deployed, wherever these Taliban are ruling Afghanistan, which is through a government of which is a byproduct of the war, and children of conflict are there. So in the areas where they are deployed, they have been given a free hand by the Taliban leadership to exercise their control and to showcase their power and subjugate the people with terror, and so. But please keep using the major title or the main name of the franchise, that is Tehreek-e-Taliban. So it's a Taliban rule. So this is the kind of a situation. How can these splinter groups and this such a huge? That's why there is an infighting now that has started inside Afghanistan, because
Yeah.
everybody wants to grab the power. This is not following. They are not following any ideology. This is a charade, discussion that they are talking about the ideology and all that. yes, I can understand they have nothing to lose, but at least they are not doing anything for the people of Afghanistan. They are not there with the agenda for the Afghani people who are being pushed out of the countries from all over the world. From all over. It's not only Pakistan who is sending them back. Iran has already packed them back. There are reports from Europe they are being sent back. United States of America who were to, who were to take care of 125,000 Afghanis who were to be
Yeah.
transferred to United States. No progress is being done on that because of the attitude of these Afghanis. Now, this is unfortunately becoming the accumulative behavior of a state which is being analyzed,
Absolutely.
and then decisions are being made by the international community. It's not only Pakistan. We are the sufferers.
Yes.
We have sacrificed the most, unfortunately, but this is how it is.
Right. Thank you very much, Major Zahid Mehmood, for joining us and being a part of the discussion today. It is, of course, a problem that is of concern for the entire international community that keeps on calling for a peaceful and stable Afghanistan. But it is, as General Saab was mentioning, only Pakistan that is paying the price, and it is important for Pakistan to make sure that their borders are secure. And so the hope is that these talks are successful, and this last-ditch effort that is being made by the mediators results in something tangible. But as of now, we don't have any real guarantees coming in. We're now going to be taking a look at our next story, which focuses on the very important meeting between the U.S. President and the Chinese Premier on the sidelines of the visit that Mr. Trump has been with regards to Asia, and of course, as part of the conference in South Korea as well. And this meeting has resulted in a warming up of relations between these two countries, but exactly how that will be implemented and what sort of measures will both the countries be taking in the near future remains to be seen. For now, we know that there is a pause for a year, and we will be seeing some sort of movement away from the initial stances of 100% tariffs on Chinese goods from the U.S. side, and of course with regards to the export of rare earth metals from the Chinese side. But what exactly will be the measures or the key terms of references for these agreements is a matter that still needs to be seen. For this, we've been joined by Professor Scott Lucas, and we'll be speaking to him with regards to this engagement. Thank you, Scott, for joining us. I'd like your take on what do you make of this particular meeting. Of course, the kind of sentiment that we now see is being reported is what we heard and expected prior to this meeting as well. But given the fact that we've just seen a pause in about a year's relationship between the two countries, do you see that this means that the threat of a trade war between these two countries is completely off the table?
No, that's because cutting through the headlines here, this is not a trade deal between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping. This isn't even a detailed trade framework. It's a tactical maneuver. And I guess the best way to illustrate that is to go through a few of the terms that were here. The first is that the U.S. is still maintaining tariffs of 47% on China. Now, that's not the 245% that Trump threatened in the spring, or even the 100% that he declared a few weeks ago, but it's 47%. The Chinese still maintain tariffs of 32% on American products. More importantly, the specific terms are more China pushing back against Trump and really his attempt to bully them in the spring. Why do I say that? First of all, on the question of the rare earth minerals, it is true that China lifted its export controls that it announced in October on rare earth minerals to the U.S. That was in response to the Trump administration expanding its sanctions on Chinese companies. However, it has not lifted its export controls on 7 rare earth minerals that it announced in April, as well as rare earth magnets. Those export controls were imposed after Trump's initial declaration of tariffs, not just on China, but on many countries around the world. So those are still in place. Secondly, it is true that China has agreed to finally resume purchasing American soybeans. Now, this would become importantly domestically for Donald Trump because 50% of all American soybeans are exported to China. that 50% of American exports that went to Beijing were effectively cut off completely. And that meant that farmers were facing billions of dollars in losses with their soybeans sitting in containers, unable to be shipped. Now, China has said, okay, we'll take some of that, we'll make a deal for some of that, which may relieve some of the pressure. But it's just a tactical shift. And then, even on the fentanyl, this is the opioid that China has been exporting the precursors to, causing the drug problem in the United States. China has agreed to tighten its control on those precursors for fentanyl, but they've been doing so since the early 2024. So it's not a completely new move. What China has done is they've given Trump the meeting, they've given him the PR, they've made him feel good. They have used this to get themselves some negotiating space while maintaining leverage in the key areas, especially over those rare earths.
Right. Professor Lucas, when we take a look at the given situation, of course, in the region, how do you see the possibilities that exist for China to explore the market around the region when it comes to a lesser dependency on the dollar, when it comes to looking at alternatives? Because a lot of the time when this concept of the US tariffs on Chinese goods was there and was very much real for the Chinese goods, a 100% tariff. So that was, of course, a concern and a possibility that existed of how regional countries will look inwards and between themselves to engage with each other. Is that something that you think still can be done by China to make less dependence on the West?
I think that's a big ask, but I think we're at an interesting moment in global history, affecting all countries, including Pakistan, in that China is trying to create an alternative economic system to that US led system that we've really had since 1945. And to an extent, when it comes to technology, when it comes to vital minerals, China does have leverage to do that. But the US led system still is a system, for example, where the dominant currency is the dollar. And because the dominant currency is the dollar, and because China's RMB is not convertible, the US still has, as it were, a priority, an ascendancy here. Many of the world's financial institutions, including international financial institutions, are linked to the United States. And to give you an example of that, on an issue which came up on the margin of the summit, the United States last week announced sanctions on Russia over its invasion of Ukraine, specifically on its two largest oil companies. But it wasn't just sanctions on those oil companies, it was also secondary sanctions on companies who trade with those companies, which include China. So the US still could have leverage by imposing sanctions, restricting China's ability to move finances to trade. So each country has certain strengths at this point, which means that I don't think one can claim ascendancy over the other. They still have this curious coexistence, even as they are competitors.
Right. There's also, of course, a number of agreements that the U.S. President has signed with other countries as part of his Asia tour. And of course, that also includes Japan, Malaysia, Cambodia, and others. And this is, of course, also part of the very important mineral resource. Of course, China has its own monopoly with regards to the critical minerals, but there are very important agreements that have been signed regarding the same with these countries. How much of that do you think will be able to take away from the kind of advantage that China enjoys in this regard?
Well, I mean, leaders always sign understandings with each other whenever they visit each other. I mean, that's kind of like part of the show that takes place. I mean, part of the answer to your question would have to go into the substance of those agreements. And the reality here is, before we talk about China, is that the Trump administration still has not completed a trade deal with any country, let alone China, this year. So let's take Japan and South Korea as examples. Japan and South Korea, to curry favor with Trump, have both said, oh, we'll invest, $550 billion by Japan into the US, $350 billion by South Korea into the United States. But they still have not reached agreement on the terms of the trade deal, on the levels of tariffs, on the sectors that they cover. So that's sort of an ongoing issue. Meanwhile, the reality here is that China controls about 61% of the world's rare earth minerals. it controls about 92%. That's 92% of the refining of those rare earth minerals. So China is almost in a near monopoly position on certain aspects of the supply chain. And it's in a leading position on the actual rare earth itself. That means China is going to have a very, very important position, whatever agreements the US tries to sign with others. So, you cannot just push Beijing to the side until you develop alternative sources of rare earths, and that's not going to happen for the foreseeable future.
Right. How important thing it will be to see whether or not the way that we've seen the engagement between the two leaders and the resulting one-year pause in this so-called trade war, how reliable do you think this pause will be, given the fact that we have seen the U.S. president imposing a lot of tariffs on multiple countries around the world, and there is rhetoric coming in with regards to an increase of tariff or a change in tariffs quite often from the White House?
Uh, the answer is we don't know how it could change because we've got two different things that happen at the same time. Um, After Trump's chaotic approach to tariffs beginning back at the start of April, not just China, but other countries have had to rely to get to the Trump administration officials, who you might say are the adults in the room. And I think one of the key ones is the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and it's like, okay, can we work out an agreement here? And in part, what you heard today, some of the issues that I mentioned came out of meetings last Sunday between the US and Chinese delegations, which were held in Malaysia. But in part, we have a second process which takes place, which is it's not orderly, it's not systematic. It's Donald Trump deciding to make a declaration because he's happy, he's upset, he's angry. So within the past few days, for example, we've seen him suddenly declare an additional tariff on Canada because of a television ad. Uh, we have seen him threaten India with further tariffs or to maintain those tariffs because he's upset that India will not credit him with supposedly ending the India Pakistan confrontation in April. So it's those mood swings from Trump that intersect with what you might call the logical or the rational process, and which one has priority at any given time.
Right. There is, of course, also concern as to what really is going on in the international community and how much of that is affecting the economic relationships of different members of the international community. There is, of course, the crises that we have seen in the Middle East, and then the Russia-Ukraine conflict adds its own problems to these aspects. How do you think that is going to affect the way that the U.S. is engaging with various countries?
If there was a lot there again, I talked about that two level approach, and you might argue that at the level of negotiations and so on, that you see some type of movement that takes place. You have, I wouldn't even call it a ceasefire between Israel and Gaza, but you have seen a reduction of the Israeli military operations into the strip. You saw last week these U.S. sanctions on Russia's oil companies I talked about, which were primarily from Trump administration officials, sort of getting a hold of the process. But the issue here is that even that logical approach stems from an idea of what does Trump want for himself? What is his transactional approach? So in the case of Israel Gaza, uh, just getting a pause in the fighting was because the Trump family's uh, holdings and its projects in Qatar, the Gulf state attacked by Israel, those were threatened in September. So they had to do something about the Trump family's personal fortunes. Trump himself, his own personal idea of his friendship with Vladimir Putin, whether or not that exists, that comes into play. So you have this curious intersection between playing the man, and that's why you see so many countries, including Pakistan, flatter Trump, talk about him as a peacemaker, versus the realities of what you have to deal with in terms of conflict and trying to ease that conflict. That relies on discussions between officials at other levels of the system.
Right. Thank you very much, Professor Scott Lucas, for joining us today. There is, of course, a lot of concern as to how these situations are going to pan out in the long run. For now, of course, there are positive reports coming in towards the U.S. and China's relationship, particularly on the economic front. But how long and how sustainable that will be, and whether or not the key points are chalked out, remains to be seen as the countries evolve into a more comprehensive framework. We're now going to be taking a look at another story that is affecting the international community and coming in from the U.S. with Mr. Trump going ahead with a change in U.S. policy after about 30 years testing for nuclear testing, because this is important in terms of the ways it affects not only the United States but also multiple countries around the world. The reasons that have been cited are that there are nuclear testings being done by countries like Russia and China, a claim that Russia has denied, saying that what it has recently tested is just something that is missiles were able to carry nuclear warheads and does not quantify as a nuclear test. However, the U.S. has a different opinion, and it seems that Mr. Trump is making it very, very clear that the U.S. will not back away if other countries are not doing the same. And so it will be essential to see how exactly the situation will evolve and what the U.S. is going to do, given the fact that the U.S. is still ahead of the race in the international community by far. For this, we've been joined by Dr. Sahar Khan, who's an independent analyst. Thank you very much, Dr. Sahar, for being part of the newsroom today. Your take on how big of a shift this is in the U.S. policy. Of course, it hasn't happened in 30 years, but the implications are huge. And given the fact that this is something that Mr. Trump seems very, very keen on, what does it mean in the larger sense for the international community and the nuclear arms race that everyone wants to avoid?
Well, thank you so much for having me on your show. I think before dissecting like President Trump's message on Truth Social, or even like what this means for nonproliferation and arms control in general, I think it's important to understand some of the bureaucracy and like what exactly his announcement, or at least the timeline of what his announcement really means. So in the United States, the federal agency that manages the U.S. nuclear stockpile and that would technically plan and conduct the test is called the National Nuclear Security Administration, or NNSA. And this is under the Department of Energy, which is a civilian-run agency, and not under the Department of War, which was formerly known as the Department of Defense, which is military-run. Now, there is a memorandum of understanding between these two agencies, and this understanding outlines their responsibilities and their roles. So the department, so NNSA, which is under the Department of Energy, is responsible for the design, production, maintenance, and the dismantlement of nuclear weapons, while the Department of War is responsible for the operational use. Now, the authority to conduct nuclear tests rests with the President of the United States because of the Commander-in-Chief role, but Congress does have oversight. So Congress has oversight in terms of appropriations, which involves funding or testing, denying funds or appropriating funds. Congress can have oversight hearings and resolutions that express support and opposition of nuclear testing. And of course, Congress is also responsible for ensuring compliance with international treaties. And the United States is a signatory of the 1996 Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. So all of those things are, I think, important to realize when we sort of figure out what President Trump means. Another important thing to keep in mind is that nuclear testing is something that can't be done in a hurry. Now, if this is an actual real call for explosive nuclear testing, which the United States hasn't done since 1992, then this would involve this would occur at the Nevada National Security Site, which is the only US site that's prepared for underground nuclear tests. And some analysts estimate that it would take about 18 to 36 months for the test to occur. And preparations would include safety and containment assessments, environmental and seismic risk analyses, potential compliance reviews with the National Environmental Policy Act, and of course, coordination between various agencies in terms of monitoring and evaluation. All of this in mind, I'll get to your main question, like what does this mean, for the non-proliferation regime and arms control? I mean, to be completely honest, it is very troubling because the ban on nuclear testing is not an official ban. There's no treaty per se. There's no law per se, but it's something that all nuclear weapon states have agreed on, except for North Korea. And North Korea tested in 2017. I also think, what's really interesting about President Trump's announcement is that I'm not really sure that he means explosive nuclear testing, or I should say, I'm not really sure what he means. He needs to clarify that as well. And most troubling out of all of this, besides the call for nuclear testing, is that there were some factual errors in President Trump's announcement. So, for example, Russia is the country that has the most nuclear weapons, not the United States. China is not going to catch up next year. I think the projections say about five years or so. And again, no other country has a program for nuclear testing. Like, this is not something that exists. So all in all, I think this announcement is not something that we should use to panic, but it is unsettling.
Absolutely. Dr. Sahar, I also want your take. You mentioned, of course, how what procedures are going to be required for this to actually be implemented. But what do you think is the sentiment that the U.S. president is getting from the Democrats and the Republicans with regards to this decision? Where do you think the inclination is?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, right now, nothing has really been said. I mean, this is still sort of a developing story, but my sense would be that, of course, Democrats would be opposed to it. And some Republicans might be as well. And I think a lot of this has to do with, the environmental impacts of nuclear testing. Now, Nevada, the site that I mentioned, for the only nuclear site, testing site that's, has been used in the United States, is in the state of Nevada. And Nevada, I don't see any policymakers in Nevada, Republican or Democrat, that would support nuclear testing. Nevada and a lot of Nevada, New Mexico, Utah are also home to Native American communities that have had the adverse effects of nuclear testing, high rates of cancers, high rates of abnormalities and deformities. In fact, the United States has a law called RECA, or the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, which is a law that basically, compensates folks who have been exposed to radiation, and many of them are from Native American nations. And so, I think President Trump's announcement has led to more questions than answers about what he wants and how the U.S. System will respond.
Absolutely. There is, of course, concern as to where this is going to impact the international community. And of course, with Russia and China being the two countries that the U.S. president has cited as well. But I want your take in terms of what sort of international obligations are there for all of these countries, particularly when we talk about the IAEA and the fact that this hasn't been done in years. Do you think that this will just be something that these decision makers can decide on their own?
I would like to think that the non-proliferation regime or norms that exist are a lot more powerful. And so I don't think it'll be that easy for President Trump to start nuclear testing. And I do think that there'll be many around him who might caution him to go down this path. And in terms of global norms, I mean, like I said, there's no like real treaty that says don't do explosive nuclear testing, but there's been so much research and scholarship that's been done to indicate the negative impacts of explosive nuclear testing, that I would be hard pressed to find anybody who might be supportive of this. And also, the U.S. has a large nuclear arsenal. President Trump has made it no secret that he wants the U.S. to modernize its nuclear arsenal, and the U.S. is doing that slowly. I think the Department of War has a budget of $1 trillion. Dollars, which is focused on modernizing the nuclear triad. You don't really need to modernize. You don't really need testing to modernize. And I think that if this goes ahead, then President Trump might even get some backlash from NNSA engineers who would argue that they've already have components that are tested, that are their readiness is available, or they're capable, and they don't need to do this kind of testing, which is so environmentally harmful.
Right. Dr. Sahar, do you think that the announcement coming in from Mr. Trump, as you were saying, raises more questions than answers? Is just perhaps a knee-jerk response to what he has construed to be nuclear testing by Russia?
Um, yes. I think, President Trump is kind of known for going to, social media to make these sort of knee-jerk reactions or be reactive in certain ways. And I do think that, that when you think about the timing of the announcement, right, it was done right before he was meeting President Xi of China in Busan, South Korea for their trade talks. And it's I think it has relieved a lot of people to know that both the U.S. and China have come up with a year-long trade deal or truce, if you will, that will lower tariffs and export controls, bringing temporary relief to businesses and consumers. But my sense is that President Trump was posturing a bit and trying to indicate to, especially to Russia, that